Do you know what f-stop is? Do you know what the f is going on? Let me tell you. Actually, hang on a second and I'll explain a little bit more to you a little more scientifically. Because f-stop may be one thing you understand in one particular mindset of something, but it probably is going to mean something else to you. And you know, there's a number of other people online who can totally take this idea and really undo it, or in another verb tense, undone, or even look at it from a north point of view. So anyway, hang on a second and we'll get right into it, so stay tuned.
Here I am, Vietnam. Rain is always coming down.
Camera Talk with Dr. Scott. Welcome. This week's episode, we're going to be looking at f-stops. What the F are we talking about here? F-stops. You hear about them. We're talking about lenses, you know, whether it's f1.2, f1.4, f2.8, 3.5, you know, so on and so on and so on up the levels all the way to 22 or 32. Some may even go beyond that. But, you know, you may also wonder, you know, what is this all about? What is an f-stop anyway? You know, you know, and other things in life can be, what the F, you know? I used to say that to some of my students in class. I say, shut the front door. And it gets them to be quiet. You know, they think I'm obviously going to say something else. But an f-stop, you know, in photography is got nothing to do with that. So, you know, and the gist of things, the simplified way to think about f-stops is, you know, the aperture. And the aperture, you know, to put it in easiest way, layman's terms, you know, for those beginners out there to understand, an aperture is very much just like the iris in our eye. You know, the black hole is called the pupil, right? And the iris is outside, that closes and opens the pupil.
I'm only crushing your heads. Crush you.
To allow in certain amounts of light so that you can see better. Obviously, in a bright sunny day, they close down, you know, to limit the amount of sunlight coming in. As soon as nighttime comes around and you don't have great lighting, your irises open up so the pupil is large and allows in more light for you to be able to at least see better in the dark. Obviously, you don't have night vision or anything like this. You know, I'll show you in a second what that looks like. But basically, it opens and closes. And of course, you know, again, in simplification terms, the aperture is open and closing, but it's not actually the aperture. The aperture is the measurement of the hole in the diaphragm. And the diaphragm are the various blades. If you ever look down the, you know, look down the barrel of a lens, you'll see, and as I told you, I'll show you in a second, you'll see various blades, almost they look like fan blades. But the way they're constructed, as you turn the aperture ring itself, it takes those you know, aperture blade, the diaphragm blades, and closes them in or opens them up. So, you know, it allows that hole to either get larger or smaller, just like the iris in your eye, to allow in certain amount of light. And you know, as I said, that's pretty much the simplified way to look at it. So you know, again, now looking at the numbers, this is to make it more confusing.
What you talking about, mister?
The lower the number, as in 1.2, 1.4, the larger the hole. So the aperture, the hole in the diaphragm blades, is the aperture itself. And if you stop down, as they call it, which means turning the aperture ring to a higher number, so 5.6 or 8 or 11 or 16, the diaphragm blades are going to contract and get smaller, and the hole, which is the aperture, the hole is going to get smaller to allow in less light. Explained with your iris in the eye. With the brighter light, the smaller your iris gets. Therefore, the black pupil that you see gets very tiny when you're looking at bright lights. And you may, remember experiences at the doctor. And the doctor has his little flashlight and he's flashing it in and out of your eye. That's what he's looking for, is the reaction of your iris opening and closing. So the aperture is not, the entire, contraption or apparatus within the barrel itself. That's the diaphragm. The diaphragm blade. So the aperture is just a hole. If you measure the hole on the inside, that's what you're actually looking at.
That's what he said.
So the way most people or photographers will explain it to to beginners or anybody asking questions, will basically take a focal length, which is, like as an example, this particular lens here is a 55 millimeter lens. 55! Now, if you take that focal length and you look at the f-stop, which again is, as example here, if it's a 50 millimeter f1.4, the way people explain the f-stop with that is you would take that focal length, which is 50, and you divide it by 1.4, and you end up with 35.7 millimeters. And that is meant, when people say that, what they're saying is the hole, the aperture itself is 35.7 millimeters across. So if you're, again, you remember in geometry class, looking at the the diameter of a circle. So it's 35.7 millimeters. And that's again, the simplified explanation of what an f-stop is. To get a little more mathematical, or to dive into the true f-stop measurement, instead of f 1.4, it would actually be, replace the f with an n, if you're doing equations. N equals f, which is the focal length, divided by d, which is the diameter of that opening, of the aperture opening. So again, a lot of people don't go down that road, but that is the true way to determine the what that f stop actually means. Because if you really looked at that the way most people explain it, let's say you take a 70 to 200 millimeter zoom lens, which a lot of, whether it's Canon or Sony or Nikon or anybody else, makes this very common zoom lens. So if you take a 70 to 200 f 2.8, you would do that math of, let's say, 200 at the max, 200 divided by 2.8, and you get 71.4. So 71.4 millimeters, if you bump that up to centimeters, is 7.1 centimeters, which is fairly big for a lens. That would, does that really equate to the size of the opening that's within the barrel?
What you talking about, Willis?
The way they determine that is when you look down the end of the barrel from this end, looking through the glass here, because of the magnification of the glass, that is really what they're saying is what you're going to see. Just looking at it that way. Now, if you look at the back end of the lens, that aperture opening, or the hole that you see, is going to look smaller because of, again, the magnification of the rear lens is different than that of the front lens. So that's why they don't equal each other. They don't look the same. Again, it's kind of a visual trick that plays upon your eyes. So just know that an f-stop is not truly what most photographers will explain it to you as. The focal length divided by the f-stop is what it means. Is that mathematical result of, again, 50 divided by f1.4 is 35.7. You know, it's truly, that's not an accurate you know, statement, but it's close enough to give you an idea of really, you know, what the whole purpose of understanding f-stops anyway is. That the smaller the number, the larger the opening. The larger the number of the f-stop, the smaller the opening in the diaphragm. So that's, you know, really what it's all about. Now, if you look at the front of a lens, and just looking at this one here, this is a Canon FD lens. It's a vintage lens.
And now for something completely different.
Okay, so the reason I'm getting a close-up here on the front of the lens is because I know with the video, obviously you're not going to be able to see it from the distance the camera is from me. So here I just want to basically just show you the markings on the front of the lens so you understand what they mean. Obviously Canon, you know, it's the brand name. It's an FD, which is a vintage lens that Canon used to make back in the 1970s. It's 55 millimeter focal length of this particular lens, and then these numericals here, the ratio 1.2. What that indicates is that for every millimeter of aperture opening, or the diaphragm entrance pupil, is another way to say it. But just basically think of it as the hole in the aperture is that. So for every 1 millimeter, you're getting 1.2 millimeters of focal length. So just think of it that way. That's basically what these numbers mean. So 1.2 would be considered a fast lens. Now, of course, the speed has nothing to do with the aperture itself. What that fast is actually referring to is the shutter speed. So that's when anybody talks about fast lenses, that's what they're actually referring to. But of course, the larger the aperture, the faster it is. So that is what these numbers are all about. Now let's get back to the video.
Silly rabbit tricks are for kids.
You know, I'm going to take you over to the whiteboard and show you, you know, a little more of what I'm talking about. Come with me.
Would you kids like to come with me?
Sounds good to me. Let's go.
Okay, so you know, here we are at the whiteboard, and this is kind of what I've already just talked about, introducing you to, but this is you know, putting up the text here so that, you know, you can review this at your own speed, so to speak. F-stops, you know, just reiterate what I've just talked about. The f-stops, the smaller the number, the larger the aperture. Larger the f-stop number, like f11, f20, f16, f22, so on and so on. The smaller the aperture opening here.
So many different sizes.
Here's my little hand drawing of what an aperture may look like. These are representative of the diaphragm blades themselves. So the hole in the middle is the actual aperture, what they're talking about, the aperture. This apparatus is not the aperture. This is the diaphragm. The hole here is the aperture, and you know, as I said, it relates to where I have is here, the iris of your eye, the way it operates the exact same way. So this is the actual equation of what we should be looking at when we talk about f-stops and how to determine you know, what the f-stop actually means. So the F stands for the focal length, you know, so you would take your 50 millimeter and you would divide it by the actual diameter, not 1.4. The actual diameter needs to be measured, and of course, as I already hopefully make clear to you. When you look down the barrel of a lens, you're looking through glass, and that glass is magnifying what you see down the barrel of the lens, and I'll show you that in a second. So that opening, the hole in the middle of the diaphragm, you can't measure it because obviously you're looking through it with your eyes and it's magnified. But if you were able to open that up and take a ruler and measure it, that opening, this hole, would be what you need to actually divide by to be able to truly understand what your f-stop really is. So that's what just what I wanted to get at by bringing you over here to see all this stuff. My example, was the 70 to 200 millimeter lens and an f 2.8. In the regular way people describe these, if you divide, let's say 200 by 2.8, you're going to end up with a 71.4 millimeter, or 7.1 centimeters. And again, if you look at the size of that 200 millimeter lens and where the diaphragm is located within that lens, is it really possible to have an opening at 7.1? Now this is at 200, so you can imagine doing a 400 millimeter lens or any of the bigger ones out there, and you divide by 2.8, you're ending up with a huge aperture, the actual hole that the equation is telling you you're going to get. And it doesn't make sense because the body of the lens is not big enough to be able to accommodate the hole that mathematically comes from that. So again, let me show you the actual barrel itself of the lens, so you can look down into it and see the aperture. So,
Do you see what I see? Do you see what I see?
okay, so here we can see the the diaphragm of this particular lens here. You can see all the little blades inside, and as I open and close it, you can see for f16 is the highest number it goes, which means the smallest hole that's that's here in the lens diaphragm itself is going to be pretty tiny, but it's not f22, it's f16. So in that regard, it's a small opening, and as we open, you see it's open all the way through. You don't see any of the diaphragm blades itself, and this would be f1.2. So as I said, as they call it, stopping down, which means getting smaller and smaller the higher the number gets, because of depth of field. And that's a whole different video we'll get at, but today we're just talking about f-stops. So f1.2, f16, and everything in between here. And as I pointed out before to you, the 1 to 1.2 is an important aspect here when you're looking at lenses.
Bloody well pay attention.
So this particular one is a 55 millimeter 1.2, so it's that's a nice lens.
That's nice.
So I hope that clears things up for you, and let's get back to what we were talking about.
What was I just talking about?
That's our look at the f-stop, that is. So I hope this kind of helped to kind of clarify what exactly an f-stop is and how it's determined.
Are we clear? Crystal.
Remember, if you want more of these kind of videos, don't forget to subscribe. And also hit that like button. YouTube likes the like button. It helps to build the channel and get more viewers out there, or get this video in front of more viewers anyway. So, so thanks for dropping by. This was Camera Talk with Dr. Scott on behalf of Modesty Photography. We're here to, help you understand more about photography, maybe save some money along the way, This particular video, of course, is more geared towards just explaining some of the technical aspects to beginners.
No, because I was...
But anyway, you know, thanks for dropping by again. You know, I really appreciate you watching the videos. And again, I hope you hit the like button. I hope you subscribe, because I'd like to, you know, bring you on board with Camera Talk. And, you know, and modern street photography. So I hope to see you again in our next video. Until then, take care. Have a great weekend. Have a great week whenever you're watching this. And we'll see you again in another video. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Peace out, Seacrest.
Here I am, Vietnam. Rain is always coming.